Your team should be built in the image of the Baltimore Ravens. There's a reason for 40 years it's been hard to play quarterback because that's a tough place to throw the ball. And you built a pretty terrific defense, but to me that is bully ball 101. That environment should be bully ball 101. You should play to your environment and your surroundings and get back to being the biggest, nastiest bully on the block. And this is a draft that is loaded with offensive linemen. And I don't know all your needs like you guys do. You know it up close and personal. You see it. You've lived with some of the struggles and the mediocrity. But it sure appears to me you got a defensive-minded head coach that's got a lot of his defensive pieces in place. Now go capitalize like crazy on this draft capital you have to build that bully, tight end, tackle, guard, running back. I think in Justin Fields, you've got an amazing dual-threat guy. So tell me why that team can't be built in the image of that team out in Baltimore.
So, and that's what I was going to say, Brock, and we're talking to Brock Huard, and you've seen Caleb Williams. You're in Pac-12 country. You've done his games. You know what a type of prospect he is. Knowing what you see from him, seeing what you've seen from Justin Fields, you're telling me stay with Justin, capitalize on the number one pick, and possibly trade down and build around Justin.
From afar, that is what I would say. And again, I don't know all the ins and outs, and so much of this has nothing to do with how you throw a football. It really doesn't. I think I'm just falling on that more and more the longer I do this and around all these, because there are so many youngsters that can spin a football. Waddle, you've seen it. I guarantee you there are guys in high school around the country that spin the football a whole lot better than dudes you played pro ball with in the 80s and 90s. I mean, it's just – so I've seen the most beautiful arm. I've seen the greatest talent. I've seen the greatest athlete. I've seen all of this stuff. But just give me the leader of men. And that's what I don't know. I'm not in that facility. I don't sit down and know the relationships like you guys do. You tell me. Is he a leader of men? Does he walk into that team room, the offensive meeting room on the practice field?
He's very well liked and very well respected. There's no question about that. Like
okay.
he has
if he
the
commands
attention.
his teammates, right?
Yeah,
if he commands his teammates, Tom, and they believe in him, then my God, use the pick that you have at 1 for somebody else to go do that. And you go, I mean, look what you could add. Look at the depth of resources in the first 2 rounds of this draft that's got elite receivers, got elite tackles, got some really good defensive edge guys, got some pretty good interior guys, which you've not had in a few years in this draft. Like, there's dudes, and then there's also running backs in the middle and the back end. Like, you could, I think, build around him if you believe that he is truly the leader of men with some pretty unique pieces in this draft.
So, Brock, if they were going to go in this direction, now that they need to find someone that can help develop him and help him take the next step, and that would be at the offensive coordinator position. Is Shane Waldron one of those guys that would build an offense that would tailor itself to what Justin does well?
That I have a hard time saying yes to, just from the 2-3 years we had in Seattle. They just couldn't run the ball.
Right.
And I don't think that was a Geno Smith issue or a horrible offensive line. It's just, I think he comes a little bit, which is surprising because the tree that he comes from should be a run play action team. And the head coach that he was playing for, basically, who'd never called anybody out, basically with us, near the end, is like, we're just not doing it. And I'm like, well, why aren't you doing it? Call the freaking run plays. Like, run the ball. Your rushes per attempt are pretty good. Your overall net yards are one of the worst in the league, or bottom 5 in the league. So I would like to say, because of the background and the tree that he comes from, that would be central. But I don't think it'd be anything like the dude that used to be with the Buffalo Bills and Jim Harbaugh and built a bully up there and built a bully in San Francisco. And if that guy's available, to me, that would make a ton of sense.
Brock, with your familiarity also with the college game, is there somebody there that you would say, hey, because like what the Ravens did is they went to Todd Monken because it wasn't working. Mm-hmm. If you identify Justin as your guy going forward, and he's not going to fit in a West Coast style, he's not going to be a guy that thrives in an offense that is designed by Shanny or one of his disciples. So where would you look for that guy? Is it the guy that used to, do it for Harbaugh back in San Francisco and then with the Baltimore Ravens? Is there somebody else out there?
Yeah, I mean, I like him. I think he's a little gruff. I don't know where he's
Greg
at.
Roman?
Yes, I do like Greg because I like somebody that's done it with a track record. And I think what was really important for Lamar, and this would be the conversation that you'd have to have with Justin and just say, listen, we're going to play to this style. Because, Lamar was taken 32 overall. He wasn't taken in the top 10. I think maybe a little easier to convince, hey, man, use your legs. Your legs in the dual threat nature, it's so hard to run the ball in the league. It is so hard. But if you give us that, and Justin did a bunch of that last year, but if we really commit to this, we got a chance to be special. And that's what Baltimore has done. They play absolutely to the strengths of the totality of that bully ball, and Lamar buys in. And many guys don't. And I don't think Caleb Williams, we've not even talked about him, who's immensely talented, who when you see him in person, as I have a half dozen times, his legs are like Franco Harris. He's a running back. He's a powerful, unbelievable athlete that can spin a football tremendously. But would Caleb Williams play that kind of game, be content with doing that, be content with throwing it 20, 25 times, never putting up the stats that other guys are, having to fight the bias. He just is a dual threat guy. Who cares? I'm a winner. That's what Lamar's learned. I'm a winner. And it may get him an MVP this year and just finally silence some of those haters.
Brock Huard joining us. He's in Seattle, does a great show out in Seattle. Also, obviously, works for Fox Sports, does a ton of college football out there. You just heard him say he's done Caleb Williams games about a half dozen times. So tell us what you like and what you don't like about Caleb Williams.
Well, what everybody likes is just a playmaking ability and movement skills in and around the pocket that are just silly. And I also had Lamar Jackson his very first start. And I remember Petrino at that time telling me, I don't know what this kid's going to do, but you've never seen somebody run like he can. And it's just a different gear. And then they played, I believe, Florida State, and he was running away from them. And I was like, this dude's just different. You see Caleb, he's just different. His strength, as I said, his power. You're going to see him at the combine in his shorts. I don't know. He'll probably not run or do much there. But when you see him, you're just like, man, this guy is truly, he's an elite athlete. And there's great athletes coming out. Jaden Daniels is a great athlete. There have been great athletes. This dude is an elite athlete. And that's why he can just make those guys look so silly on a football field, no matter who's rushing them. Harder to do with grown men. Harder to do in the NFL, harder to do with less space, the hash marks and everything that just condenses everything into a phone booth. But that is his going away talent. The learning curve is just going to be playing on time and rhythm. Playing on time and rhythm.
What style of offense do you think he'll thrive in at the next level, Brock?
Ooh, I think that McVay-Shanahan tree would be a pretty good tree for him. Which again, we'll point back to Shane Waldron because he grew up in it and came up in it. But I think Caleb handled quite a bit. Lincoln's system is pretty diverse, and he asks a ton and a lot of checks and a lot of things go on within that. And he could handle all of that volume, the two of those guys together. So you put him in that kind of system, you put him in that run, play action, movement. I am just such a fan of that. I'm such a fan of the play action game because the game is so hard. It is so condensed. Detroit does it so beautifully. A bunch of the teams left standing do it so well. San Francisco at the very top of that list. Baltimore probably right next to them. And I don't care about the EPA numbers or any of that. Just my eye says, yep, run and play action, man. Still two of the most potent tools. It was that way with Sylvie in the 80s. That way when I was watching on the bench in the 90s and early 2000s, and now watching on my couch in 2024.
What about we hear when we're 1,200 miles or however many miles away. What about the personality stuff that we hear? What do you know about him as a guy?
Yeah, I think this year was a little harder, I'll be honest. I think when he ascended, it's always harder to handle prosperity and success. My brother's on staff there at USC as well, so I've got quite a bit of background on this, and I'll tell you the one thing that they loved about that dude is he treated everybody incredible. And that's not always the case in Gen Z, especially when they get a lot of stuff handed to them or have earned. Let me rephrase that, because he earned all of that NIL and everything that came in all those accolades. But he treated people incredibly well. He was generous, and we don't talk about that very much with quarterbacks.
Right.
But again, away from my whole spinning a football, how are you as a human? How do dudes get around? are you just generous in your time and your gifts and giving people, like he gives it away. So those things are really, really cool. I think this year handling prosperity was hard. It was hard. I don't, there was a little drama at times. I don't know if I, love the crying in front of the cameras, even though they tried to hide his face and do all that stuff. He's real. I mean, he's a real dude. He doesn't try to fake it. But this year, I think, was much, much more challenging, which should only get him ready for the NFL, man. Especially if you're a top pick, top 2 pick. Like, yep, you're going to have to handle all that comes with that. And I think he's got the spine in the background to do it.
As someone who played in the league, Brock, and we're talking to Brock Huard, and was someone who was a top recruit like you were, tell us why someone, like, in one aspect you're saying he's real, but you didn't like him crying. Explain why.
Well, it's just the drama. Like, do that in the locker room. Like I was around Peyton Manning, arguably one of the best to ever do it. And I probably, gleaned some of my opinion off of that. And maybe that's unfair to compare and contrast, a Peyton to a 20-year-old. But just watch the way, and my older brother was around Tom Brady. Won 2 Super Bowls as his backup. And he and I chat, and it's like, man, those two were just so simpatico in so many ways. Like, handle that and all that tears and all that emotion off of it, because it's going to just generate more distraction, and you're going to have to answer to it, right? And just some of the stuff that if you bring it upon, just know that it's coming, and in the NFL, it's going to be coming full force. So that is it. But I appreciate guys, and it's a different generation, man. It's different than it was in the day, and Gen Z is a different type of generation to have to lead. I do think, though, honestly, I think it is an advantage when you've had to handle that prosperity through college. That is one tool that is different in this evaluation for all of these scouts. We asked Pete Carroll earlier this year when they got their head bashed in by San Francisco, how in the world did the whole league miss on Brock Purdy? I'm looking at the QBs remaining, right? The 8 QBs remaining in the playoffs right now. In their draft positions were 1, 1, 2, 7, 10, 26, 32, and 262. How? And Pete said, and had a pretty good answer. He said, listen, those guys in the top 10, there's so many busts, the whole world's thrown on them. Trey Lance had so much thrown on his shoulders he had never experienced in his life coming out of North Dakota State. Nothing. He had not handled failure. He'd not handled attention. He'd not handled criticism. He'd not handled finance. He hadn't handled any of that. Caleb Williams has. He won a Heisman. He's handled a lot of that. And he had to handle the pressures and the successes, and ultimately this year a bunch of failures too. So I think in the end that does make him, nobody's a sure-proof prospect at all, but I think you know a whole lot more about what you're getting.
This is supposed to be a really deep quarterback class. I'm curious. I know you've seen a lot of Bo Nix, and I know you've seen, obviously, a lot of Michael Penix. Have you seen a lot of Drake May? Have you seen a lot of J.J. McCarthy? And if so, how would you kind of slot these guys? And is Caleb Williams by far the best of what you've seen?
Yeah, I've not seen Drake in person, which is a bummer. I think every other of those names you mentioned I have seen, and it's such a difference. Scouts say that all the time, right? I got to see him in person. It's one thing to watch on television. It's one thing to watch the tape. Let me see him in person. When I saw Brock Purdy in person at Iowa State, I was like, this dude is teeny. Like, he is so small. His hands are so small. Like, this guy has maximized everything he possibly could, but I don't know how he's going to do it. And then he proved me and everybody else wrong. So when I get to see a Bo Nix or a Penix, I mean, wait till the combine comes. I can guarantee this headline, you're going to read this. Michael Penix throws a football like nobody else. It screams. It comes off his 11-inch hands in a way that's like different, just about different than anybody not named Josh Allen or Matthew Stafford. I mean, he's got top 5 arm on the planet Earth. That's how well he throws a football. But his body's pretty frail. I mean, he's been a kid that has been beat up and brings a lot of that history. And even this year, played through some pretty significant injuries, because when they see him there at that combine or at the Senior Bowl here in a couple of weeks, it's going to be like, wow, can this thing in this body just endure the punishment that the league takes? So I'm a little bummed that I have not seen Drake in person. I know people that absolutely love him, love his personality, love everything that he brings to the table. And it is, I would say, this is one of the deepest ones we've had, in that if you're looking for a certain flavor in Baskin-Robbins, you got it. You got it. You found that a little bit last year, right, with Anthony Richardson and C.J. Stroud. They're all a little bit different. But this one goes a little bit deeper on the old ice cream aisle with a whole bunch of different flavors.
Brock Huard for another minute. It's Waddle and Sylvie on ESPN 1000. All right, so you gave us what you thought the Bears should do. You like keeping Justin, maybe trading down and getting more to build the football team around Justin. Is this a no-lose situation for the Bears? Whether you go down that first aisle, like you said, or like you were talking up Caleb Williams, if they choose to draft Caleb Williams #1, is either or a win for the Bears?
Yeah, I think it is. I would just lean into what you got. Like what you got in Justin Fields. You may know what he isn't either, right? And there may be some areas there that, boy, we got to make sure we build. And that is so many quarterbacks. I mean, that's Jared Goff, right, who should win this weekend and get his team to an NFC championship game, who's already in a Super Bowl. Oh, he ain't good enough. Really? Really? I mean, he played in the Super Bowl and going to be a part of Detroit taking them to an NFC. Like, he's not good enough? Yeah, well, we got to trade him. And I guess for Stafford, it worked out because ultimately he did win a Super Bowl. But that's because he brought all of that experience from Detroit, all that scar tissue, all that toughness, all that background, all that experience. Caleb Williams is going to start over. You're going to start over. And there's going to be a learning curve. And guess what? He ain't perfect either. You're going to have to learn what he is and what he isn't. Guess what? Trevor Lawrence, he ain't perfect either. You know, he's one of the great prospects coming out, but you still got to build a team around him. And when you've got these kind of draft capital and resources, just in this draft, with pieces at the line of scrimmage that you need, man, I think I would stand on the table, make a strong case. As long as he's a leader of men, your leader of men, you roll with Justin.